Hello, everybody. My name is Chris McMeeking, and I have eye contact problems. No, I have multiple monitors. There we go. My name is Chris McMeeking, and I am here to talk to you about a new YouTube channel that I'm trying to start. I don't know if I'm gonna do this for a long time or if I am just going to share a few videos up to an event that I care a lot about, Global Accessibility Action Day. But I have been getting a lot of interest lately from companies that I normally view as primarily tech companies wanting to get into native mobile accessibility. And I think it's just a time when there's a peak of interest around the topic, and I feel like I have a lot to share about it. So I am going to go through the process of sharing a lot about it, and then we'll see where this goes. But at the very least, I'm going to be doing a lot of content leading up to, like I said, that global accessibility. Is it awareness or action day? I'll have to ask. I'll have to ask Jennison, but let's go. Who am I? My name's Chris McMeeking. Why do you care about what I think about native mobile accessibility? Let's go through that real quick. I am a native mobile accessibility engineer. Before mobile screen readers were a thing, I have been doing this for over 10 years now. I started in college working on one of the first switch control implementations. Was an Android custom ROM I built in my basement in college at the University of Michigan. It was a project that the semester before that was a group of amazing students doing awesome things in I think they're all in the mobile field actually still, doing awesome things in their own right. We partnered with Mott Children's Hospital in our senior software design class to build an application called the Assistive Scanning Keyboard. Got a lot of awesome traction, won a few great business competitions, awards from the Multiple Sclerosis and the Cerebral Palsy Foundation, Intel Innovators, great stuff. Led to me realizing that we could build it more generally. I turned it into an Android custom ROM, which is you can take the Android open source project and build it into your own thing. And so I customized a version of the Android open source project. I in fact still have the Nexus 9 that I built that thing on sitting in my drawer here. But just an awesome project. And one of the first third-party assistive technologies that existed on a mobile platform. So that's my kind of technical background in the subject matter. Finally, I spent 10 years at DQ heading their mobile accessibility technical efforts. Was a product owner, an architect of both Android and iOS analysis libraries. They're still doing awesome work on those libraries. Highly recommend talking to DQ if you need anything in the native mobile accessibility department besides just random YouTube content. I'm a frequent CSUN speaker on both design and technical topics. I haven't been to CSUN in a couple of years. COVID, I like going in person. Getting used to this digital thing. That eye contact joke was not completely a joke. It's a struggle for me to do the digital thing. I like to be in person. The ways that I've developed to handle my own personal accessibility difficulties don't work as well in the digital world. I don't like texting. I don't like typing words. I don't like sending emails. And the reality is that a lot of the interaction you do if you are doing something digital is in either ways where your emotions and your intent just don't come across as clearly. And that's something that I struggle with. So I will do my best. But please, if you're ever interacting with me in messages or in email or basically somewhere where you don't get to hear the inflection of my voice when I swear, I'm sorry, and just assume that everything that I say about native mobile accessibility is said with the same passionate smile, because that's pretty much the way I'm thinking about it all the time. Finally, contributor to WCAG 2.1 For a period of time, I was working with the W3C. I love the folks at the W3C. They do awesome stuff. And I worked really hard and contributed some stuff to WCAG 2.1. Ultimately, our goals are just a little bit different. That W at the beginning of WCAG stands for web, and various members of that group have made that very clear, both to me and the community. And to be honest, in the content, we'll get into it. I don't want to start off with that, but the goals are different, and WCAG can apply to mobile, and it does apply to mobile in a lot of ways, but there's also a lot of ways that it creates confusion in something that I care deeply about. And like I said, we'll get into that. All right, what is this channel? What will we talk about? First off, user agent accessibility guidelines and the challenges of native mobile accessibility. WCAG, UAG are all interrelated. We'll talk about WCAG, we'll talk about UAG, and some unique challenges that native mobile accessibility has in the industry, how people with disabilities interact with native mobile applications, and importance a native mobile accessibility engineer plays in understanding how this applies to each operating system. The challenges that this relationship between WCAG and UAG brings upon the ecosystem results in the need for a special type of individual, one that I personify in a lot of ways, but I also hang out on the design side and the purely technical side. But there is a bridge between the engineering side of accessibility and the design side of accessibility, that the complication of applying WCAG to the ecosystem means is necessary, right? And I'm going to call this the native mobile accessibility engineer, and talk about why this bridge is important, and why a lot of the current ways that I see a lot of the kind of top Android applications on the market approaching that just aren't working. And why this particular role and this particular person is important in a company implementing native mobile applications in an accessible way. Videos about native mobile accessibility until Global Accessibility Action Day. I'm almost positive it's action. I hope I'm right. Jennison, tear me apart if I'm wrong. And beyond, if I get good feedback, right? If I get good feedback, if I feel like users are engaging, I know that native mobile accessibility is a niche topic. I'm not looking for thousands of views a day. I'm not looking to make money from YouTube on this. I just want to share my knowledge. If you all are interacting with me, if you all are finding this information useful, then I will go for it. And I'll keep supplying it, but I am committed to doing this up until Global Accessibility Action Day. I have too many people who are interested and gave me good feedback on this idea for me to not try and at least follow up. And like I said, one video per day until Global Accessibility Action Day. I am on it. Finally, MOBAG, Mobile Accessibility Guidelines. Not convinced on that acronym yet. We'll see. At the end of all of this, my last video combination will be my translation of WCAG for iOS and Android respectively. Those are two different things. That's one of the things that people get wrong about native mobile accessibility from the start, is native and web are different. I feel like everyone is kind of starting to get an intrinsic understanding of that. I see a lot of the mistakes that existed in native mobile applications 5 or 6 years ago from people trying to overly apply WCAG are filtering themselves out. But when we're talking about really accessible applications, iOS and Android are as different as iOS and web, and Android and web. iOS and Android have their own challenges. And so when we're talking about interpreting WCAG, it's not interpreting WCAG for native. It's interpreting WCAG for iOS and interpreting WCAG for Android. And I will absolutely do a video on which, excuse me, too much pop for lunch. Those will be very long videos. We're talking like an hour to 2 hours a piece. I will do my best to segment them up well, but it's not efficient for me to do them separately. So I'll add the time markers when we get there. That'll be coming. So UAG and the challenges of native mobile. Let's talk really, really quick about these. This is a big, big topic that I'll cover over the course of the next few weeks. User agent accessibility guidelines. User agents include browsers, browser extensions, media players, readers, and other applications that render web content. And then here's one of the things that you're going to see as a theme in here is the word web pop up all over the place, right? Companies want to rely on UAG and WCAG, user agent accessibility guidelines, and web content accessibility guidelines to guide them. And that's certainly something that is reasonable, and a lot of the intents that come from the various success criteria and comments within those documents, websites, I don't know what you call them, within those guidelines, there we go, are reasonable and accurate. And in fact, some of them apply in a normative sense. If you go in and dig into what all of the kind of looser definitions of these things are, you can make them apply legally, and mostly it ends up working. But at the same time, they're built with a certain ecosystem in mind, in particular, an ecosystem that is standardized and beholding to those guidelines. Android and iOS are not. They are owned by a singular entity. And that entity can do whatever they want, really. They are beholden to their customers. They can't just go off and create a completely unusable platform. Then they wouldn't have customers for very long. But within what is reasonable for their customer base, they can take their platforms in whatever direction that they want to. They aren't beholden to these guidelines. It is good for them to stick to the parts of them that are sensible for their platform. But when you look at applying that across the ecosystem, things break down pretty quickly, and that has a deep, deep impact on the web content accessibility guidelines and how they apply. Because in the native mobile ecosystem, the native application equivalent of a user agent is the operating system. And Google and Apple control that operating system in its entirety, and that has dramatic impacts for the way that we want to apply WCAG and the web content accessibility guidelines. Let me read my bullet points here. I skipped around a little bit, want to make sure I read my slides. One of the bullet points that I skipped, except operating systems aren't covered by UAG. Right? They're controlled in their entirety by a singular entity driven to update them with new features as frequently as possible, right? Just think about the difference in the evolution time. How long does it take for a new feature to be a fringe feature in Firefox or Netscape? Is Netscape even still a thing, right? You have a browser develop this fringe feature that's experimental, and they put a little checkbox on it, and everybody's like, hey, that's pretty cool. And then 5 years later, it works its way through standards documents, and then suddenly other browsers start supporting it, and it takes a long time for those things to work their way through the web ecosystem. In native mobile, these things happen on a semi-annual basis. Every 6 months to a year, Android and Apple release new features, new APIs, new things that their developers have to care about, new things that designers have to care about, new configurations, dark mode, display size, text size, switch control, voiceover, all of these different configurations and assistive technologies and new APIs for interacting with those assistive technologies, and they release them whenever they want. There's a cadence and there's a logic to it, and they have deprecation schedules. They have to do all those things to respect the community, because you need the development community to have respect for your platform in order to be successful. But they are beholden to those developers in a non-tangible, non-user agent guideline, not standardized like the web sense, and that makes the ecosystems crazy different. Google and Apple own their respective user agent ecosystems. They own them essentially in their entirety. There are pieces of the ecosystems that you can kind of consider to be user agents. I think technically speaking, in UAG, an assistive technology is a user agent. The browser is certainly a user agent. In this case, the browser is kind of akin to the APIs and the infrastructure that Apple and Google provide to build applications. But they own the entirety of that process, all the way down from the code that is implementing that view layer, to how applications are structured, to how you segue between applications, to the launchers that have you launch applications, to all the way up to the assistive technologies. In Android, you can have a third-party assistive technology. In practice, there aren't very many, and they certainly aren't very popular. In iOS, Apple owns the entirety of that ecosystem, all the way up to the assistive technologies. We have to give Apple and Google that respect and develop things when we're talking about accessibility that respect the intent of what they have for their platform. And that is a big, big challenge. And it's very difficult to track, and it's very difficult to keep up with. And all of that impacts accessibility heavily. They control everything. I skipped ahead. I keep skipping ahead. That's going to be a theme here. I'm going to skip ahead. This is an outline. It keeps me on track. Speaking of my own personal challenges, my PowerPoint presentations keep me on track because I jump ahead sometimes because it's all up here. Google and Apple own their respective user agent ecosystems. They control everything: APIs, assistive technologies, interfaces for third-party assistive technologies, so on and so forth. This means that it is very, very important to code components in a way that these platforms vendors intend, particularly when these intents are tested for or documented, right? I don't know how many times I've gone into an organization and had the primary thing that I do be, hey, your application works on the device that you test on, but it doesn't work on these Samsung devices or these HTC devices or this old version of iOS, or worse, this new version of iOS that just came out. Talk about minor PR problems when your application breaks because of an operating system update. Major pain in the butt. These are all problems that we may deal with in the web, but we deal with in the web in a different way, right? You have user agents that implement things. You have, you know, that thing that never works in Firefox, or that thing that never works in Chrome. We can handle those problems in a different way on the web than we do on mobile. It's a very common thing, for example, in the web sphere, to say, hey, here's the browser and assistive technology versions that we support, and we'll do the best for everything else. You can't say that when you're dealing with Apple and iOS. Sorry, it doesn't work on that new iOS version. We support the old one. Doesn't really fly, and you're going to lose a lot of customers really quickly, right? If you stray from Google, Apple's intent for a component or API, you can find yourself with an application that is broken on older versions, or worse, that breaks when a new OS is released. Really, really important concept. Extra important when you're talking about how assistive technologies interact with the ecosystem. We will cover this in detail. Leads to two major distinct problems. On Google, open source fragmentation, and I don't know what I was going to say there. I probably got a little distracted. I bet my cat came up and jumped on my lap. Open source fragmentation, and the fact that you have to deal with so many different combinations of things. The Android ecosystem is very complex. You look at your different device manufacturers: Samsung, Google, Motorola, close to the same but not the same. BlackBerry, I think, is still out there. Amazon with their ecosystem, which is like Android and Amazon mixed in one. You have the TV ecosystem, and while you may not be building applications for Fire TV, the fact that Fire TV is a thing within the Android ecosystem, and that various pieces of the Android open source project are consumed in there, means that Google and the open source project has to take into account those users. So when you are looking at, and this is especially impactful for things like keyboard accessibility, when you're looking at the way those Android TV things function, the arrow key navigation APIs are deeply related to the Android keyboard APIs. And this all impacts if not directly the things that we implement in native mobile applications, the fact that those two things are a quasi-shared ecosystem complicates them dramatically. The distinct problem for Apple is different. Remember, one of the things that I said before is iOS accessibility and Android accessibility are different as either one and web accessibility. In Apple, the problem is it's a black box. In Android, when I get a weird kind of quirky accessibility behavior in Android, I can go download the talkback code. I can go download the switch control code. I wrote a lot of it. I can go download the Android open source project. I have access to the operating system code. I can go in and I can see what's going on. In Apple, we can't do that. We have to make, when we're talking about aligning the intent of the Apple's intent for the platform with our code and making sure that we're using their APIs the way that they want them to be used so that things don't break in the future. A lot of this is inference. A lot of this is things that we have to explore and figure out. And if you haven't been tracking their intents for some of these APIs, they're not well documented. They might hint at what they do, but then you go in and you start playing around with it and you see, oh, that thing doesn't really quite do the thing that Apple says it's going to do. Let's face it, that documentation was probably written by somebody who doesn't have a deep technical understanding of the accessibility side of what they're doing. Those teams talk to each other, but you can't review everything in detail. Not to the extent that is required to create a true link between the API and the user intent. That is an immensely complicated thing to understand, especially when you're thinking about the broad ecosystem of user needs and assistive technologies and all of that stuff, right? And so one of the challenges of Apple is just the black box nature of it, the fact that we're trusting documentation, and Apple does a pretty good job. They're all right, certainly better than Android on the user side of their technical documentation, but it's not perfect, and certainly leads to confusing accessibility problems if you haven't been tracking the intent of some of these things for a long time. And that's all stuff that we will get into in detail. The native mobile accessibility engineer. I want to talk about a persona, a particular role that every organization hoping to develop accessible mobile applications should have. A skill set, deep architectural understanding of a specific layer of the operating system. You don't need to know a lot about how to structure iOS applications and core data and model view model. You need to know a lot about the view. You need to know a lot about the view. You need to know a lot about the UI accessibility element protocol. You need to know a lot about the UI accessibility container protocol, and you need to know a lot about how users interact with those layers. In Android, the equivalent is accessibility node info, collection item info, and how views and the assistive technology layer connect to the user and what they see. You need to have a deep empathy for users of assistive technology and how this layer impacts them. You need a functional understanding of how applications are built and architected. You should be able to sit down and build your own iOS and your own Android application, but it doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be architecturally sound. We, in an ecosystem of people trying to build applications, we need to work together. We need people that understand that model view controller, model view model, and when you use which. We need all those people, but we also need people who understand the users and a deeper sense of how they interact with the platform. And the reality is upkeeping both of those bits of knowledge to a high level is impossible. There is so much information and so many changes in the native mobile ecosystem that happen so frequently that upkeeping both knowledge bases to the extent to actually develop really beautiful, really efficient, really usable, really stable applications. You can't know everything, and you need both of those people in your organization. And then finally, the ability to code well enough to solve the big accessibility challenges Android and iOS present, particularly regarding the creation of custom controls. Anytime you are building a control that leaves behind something that the operating system wants to do for you, you become responsible for all of those. What happens in Android 9, what happens in Android 10, what happens in Android 11, what happens in iOS 12, what happens in iOS 9, what happens in any version of that thing that you support, including on Android, sometimes problems that manifest themselves because of difference in operating system manufacturer, Samsung versus Google, you become responsible for all of those things. And so you don't need to be an amazing coder. You don't have to sit there. You're not going to write tons of code, but every once in a while, you have to have the ability to go in and say, I need to write you an accessibility delegate for that custom Android control, because if I don't, this thing is only going to work on 10% of the devices in the world. Right? And when to add the if iOS 9 do this thing to your accessibility delegate is more of an art than it is an engineering discipline. You have to know how to write good code. You have to know how to make it readable. But a native mobile accessibility engineer spends a painstaking amount of time making 100 lines of code perfect, not thousands of lines of code reasonable, right? Need to be able to code some beautifully perfect code for people, native mobile accessibility engineer. And finally, why do we need this role? You can't engineer your way towards an accessible application, especially not in ecosystems that are at the whim of a singular entity. You have to understand the operating system and how the vendor's intent for a piece of that operating system, the view layer, impacts users, particularly users of assistive technologies. Great role, really important, and a role that I see misunderstood, both in the way that it is advertised, in the way that it is treated, in the expectations, and especially in how it is interviewed for. I have been part of 3 or 4 a native mobile accessibility engineer, architect, staff engineer, they're all the same thing. Companies just obviously have a big misunderstanding of what it is that this role does, and that's evident in their applications. You can see a pattern of the accessibility issues that the lack of this role and the need for it in those organizations. Finally, here's my goal: a video per day until Global Accessibility Action Day. I'm hoping to a video on these topics every day. Until that day, expect topics like what a native mobile accessibility engineer does and how to recognize a good one, how assistive technologies work, both from a user and a tester's perspective, the concept of design aligning with code intent, saving you time and effort, while also being the only way to be truly accessible in such fractured ecosystems. If you have code that is exhibiting the problems that I've already outlined in this video, A, it's not accessible, and B, it's costing you a lot of money. How to architect for accessibility, how to fix a few deep challenges when coding for accessibility. I will get technical on this channel. I want to keep this as generally informative and fun as I can, but there are some days when I'm going to have to open up an IDE and be like, hey, these are complicated problems. Here's some code. And if you end up using that code to interview someone for a similar position, cool. Finally, like I said, I will end with my interpretation of user agent accessibility guidelines and web content accessibility guidelines and how they apply to the mobile ecosystem. And a lot of these topics will be covered individually per platform. Again, iOS and Android are as different as web and native. They are not the same platform. There's some similarities, especially on the design side. But when you get down into the technical detail, iOS and Android are very different. I'm sorry, it's a pain. The native mobile world is a pain, but it's simple for the user, and there's a lot of value there. MOBAG, Mobile Accessibility Guidelines. Near guide, I will publish my best translation of WCAG for Android and iOS, which I am in the process of getting French feedback on from other trusted industry experts. I'm not sure how the word French snuck in there. I'm trying to do a video a day. There's going to be typos on these slides. I'm sorry. This will cover a combination of how to apply success criteria from WCAG that apply directly to Android and iOS, a reapplication or rewording of the intent of the success criteria to make sense for the platform, and some common sense success criteria to ignore given the obvious differences between the ecosystems. One of the things that's frustrating to me about WCAG is, as great as it is, native mobile would almost be better off without it. And that's because a lot of the success criteria that people really cling to are things that actually make mobile worse, mobile accessibility worse. We need to be careful with how we apply WCAG to native mobile operating systems, but also we want to make sure that we fill in those gaps. We want to make sure that we don't let those gaps become places that cause people to question whether WCAG should apply at all, because it should. There are very significant pieces of WCAG that do a lot of good for native mobile. And I think all that is really required is for people to go through and say, hey, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go through and say, this success criteria works and can be applied directly. The intent of this success criteria works. Here's how you apply it. And then finally, here's some to maybe come up with your own internal interpretation of, or just let them go. Finally, the expected format for that, like I said, is a long form YouTube video. I'll do my best to section it out. And like I said, if I get good feedback on all of this process and have support, maybe I'll turn that into a website of its own. Contact me if you have any comments or want to chat accessibility. Reach out. If you have an idea for a video you'd like to see, comment here. I'm interested in feedback on setting up a Patreon or similar account so that I can provide more content. I have a mission up to Global Accessibility Action Day to provide as much content as I can to raise awareness for the topic, but at the same time, I would love to continue doing this if this is something that the community gets value from. And so as long as I can get enough supporters to cover my costs for maybe some upgraded equipment, some audio, and a little bit of the time, I would love to do this as often as you all want me to, and have good comments and good content to fill in the time. So on social networking, reach out to me. I am pretty much Chris CM 2006 everywhere. If you're on a platform and search Chris CM 2006, it's probably me. LinkedIn is a place that I'm active. I'm not super active on Twitter, although I'm thinking of becoming more active on Twitter. That's my email. And Facebook, Chris McMeeking, the one with the cool car, which I am super excited because it is almost summer in Michigan. And I am looking forward to getting back outside. But thanks for listening. And like I said, really interested in feedback on whether or not this is something that you would subscribe to. It's something that I have a passion for. I like sharing about it. I am here to share until GAD, and we'll see how it goes after that. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.